The 1917 revolution against the Tsars of Imperial Russia led to one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. Despite promising beginnings, the United Soviet Socialist Republics, known as the USSR, entered a slow state of decline starting around the 1970s. By 1991, the state was dissolved. Because of bad monetary policy and inflated military spending, the Soviet Union never entered a state of real prosperity. Due to extreme debt, the government could not fulfill its communist mission of providing for the people. The uncensored Olympics of the 1970s made the citizens realize how disadvantaged they were on the global scale. Seeing ideal American families on television made them question their Soviet lifestyle. The crushing poverty that the citizens lived in made them envious of Western culture, leading to the widespread call from Soviet citizens for political and cultural change. When the Soviet citizens realized how shackled they really were, they demanded more rights, leading to Mikhail Gorbachev creating the Perestroika and the Glasnost in 1986 and 1988. Perestroika, translated as restructuring, was a committee that devoted to the restructuring of the Soviet economic and political policies. Its sister policy, the Glasnost, translated as openness, allowed for greater transparency of the Soviet government and allowed some people to openly criticize the communist regime. Because Gorbachev allowed for open criticism, many rebel groups were created and later ignited the 1991 coup.
Hardliners, conservative hardliners, seized power from President Mikhail Gorbachev. They installed Vice President Gennady Yunayev to head the new 8-member ruling council. Gorbachev is reportedly being held under house arrest at his vacation home in the Crimea. The president of the Russian Republic, Boris Yeltsin, is leading the opposition to the coup. He denounced the new government, and he said that he is taking charge of Russia. He ordered the tanks to get out.
The 1991 Soviet coup d'etat was a failed overthrow of the Soviet Gorbachev government by hardcore communist Soviet leaders that occurred from the 19th to the 21st of August 1991. These leaders were opposed to Gorbachev's establishment of the Perestroika and Glasnost policies, which were seen as anti-communist. The Soviet leaders met with the KGB to develop a plan. If Gorbachev refuses to declare a state emergency and put the government back to original Soviet policy, they would try to force him to resign. He refused. The KGB arrested officials and cut radios from the airwaves. Moscow citizens, seeing this as a coup, gained control of the Russian parliamentary building known as the White House. Though the military was told not to take part in this coup, after the citizens of Moscow erected barricades around the White House, a state emergency was declared and a curfew announced. A tank battalion announced its loyalties to Boris Yeltsin, the leader of the most popular Soviet republic. After 2 days of standoff, the coup finally fell apart, with the KGB and Soviet officials arrested. The Soviet citizens' opposition to this communist overthrow showed how little they cared for the communist system of government. This coup and the opposition to it led almost immediately to the dissolution of the USSR.
The unilateral rise of America came after the 1991 coup in Russia, because with the fall of communism, people had no other alternative but to turn to dominant form of government and economy, capitalism. After World War II, the United States had only one enemy to compete against. After the fall of communism and Soviet Union, the United States had no one else to compete with culturally, economically, and militarily. The United States had become a power to be reckoned with by having an unchallenged advanced navy and a top-of-the-line air force, to the expansion of trade and introduction of new raw materials. This led to an increase in global trade and systems development within a capitalist world.
Even with the fall of the USSR, its former satellite states still have strife, unrest, and persecution. Some countries, like Bosnia, gained extreme senses of nationalism and led genocides against others within their country. Others, like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, have never had free elections and are swallowed in poverty. The Soviet Union's heavy military spending and backwards fiscal policy led to many of the satellite states being ignored when it came to industrialization. So when all of the Soviet leaders and all of the Soviet money was cut off, these states fell down the hole. They still live in squalor today. These countries have almost no free elections, and it doesn't seem to have any within sight. The only countries that got out relatively clean were Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. These countries were the most eager of all the Soviet satellites to gain their freedom. Before the USSR, they had been westernized, and after the USSR, they returned to the West. After the fall of the USSR, most of its former people live in poverty and unfair political climates. For them, nothing has changed. The Soviet Union has been a major turning point in the 20th century, caused by irresponsible military spending and money management that led to the Cultural Revolution in the 1991 coup. The fall made the United States the unchallenged superpower of the world. The former satellites gained their supposed freedom, but lived in horrible conditions still. The USSR's collapse made capitalism the main economic system adopted around the world. The collapse of the Soviet regime had good effects for Western and capitalist Europe and America, but the satellite states have suffered as their now dead master was irresponsible. Though it is dead, the United Soviet Socialist Republic still greatly affects the world it helped create.